What is up, guys? Wrestling Premiere is here. To say Mick Foley as a kid was one of my favorites is a huge understatement. I know you guys don't hear me talk much about him, but that's because his run in the WWF was very short. Granted, I'm not an Attitude Era kid. He was in my top 5 all time. I voted for him instead of Austin on the Cyber Sunday poll. I just really loved him. He sacrificed his body unlike anyone else in the WWF in the late 90s. Just plain likable, and I guess I related to him as a kid. A good guy with good intentions, for the most part. Foley really resonated with me. I'd go as far to say that I liked him even more than Austin and Rock. So now that's out of the way, let's talk about this return. So in the early to mid-2000s, Mick Foley had a somewhat complicated relationship with WWE. I ain't trying to push the narrative that he had issues with the company, like he's fighting them, he hated them or whatever. No. It's just the fact that Foley was very vocal about the company's booking decisions, and at times he felt he could do more and wanted to leave. He talked a bit about this in the Hardcore Diaries book. Foley was as retired as Terry Funk during this time period, stating that he's done for good. Then he came back for WrestleMania 2000, and it was a very fringe retirement. Hell, he even came back in 2004 to put over Randy Orton massively. Foley really was a master of making stars. He elevated Triple H to the next level, got Orton to that level where the WWE made him world champion. Hell, he even had a little thing with Samoa Joe, CM Punk, and Ring of Honor. He didn't wrestle them, but still. He was always interested in making new stars. I just learned about this while making this video, but Foley wanted to bring in Joe and Punk to the WWE as these guys who don't have muscles but can wrestle in an effort to stick it to Vince. It was an idea Foley had that obviously didn't come to fruition, but moral of the story, Foley likes making stars. Enough talk about that, let's get into it. So the topic of Mick Foley's return. For some reason, he once again got the itch to return to WWE for another run in 2005. He provided commentary for the ECW One Night Stand pay-per-view, which for some reason I always seem to forget. And 2 months later, he gets a phone call not from Vince McMahon, but from Jeff Jarrett. Apparently, Double J wanted Foley in TNA, and this was back when the promotion had a bunch of rising stars that came in from Ring of Honor and the Indies. Raven was also another guy that was interested in bringing Foley down to Orlando, but didn't want to put much pressure on him. Here's what Foley had to say about this in an interview with Alex Marvez in September of 2005. I think Raven put it in my head that if I helped TNA get off the ground, it would dwarf any of my other wrestling accomplishments, said Foley. Obviously, I was not the long-term answer, but I could have been a much-needed shot in the arm. If people knew the figures I was offered, they'd think I should have had my head examined for even considering the TNA offer. But ultimately, the toughest thing for me was feeling like I was being disloyal to a guy who has been really good to me. So of course you know that he re-signed with WWE. Foley made his official return on the homecoming episode of Raw when he was a guest on Piper's Pit. His old rival Randy Orton ended up interrupting and all hell broke loose. As for his first feud back, it was with the flavor of the month, scratch that of the year, Carlito. He was one of the biggest rising stars in the WWE at this point, and so they thought having him feud with Foley was a good idea, I guess. On the October 17, 2005 episode of Raw, Carlito hosted his own cabana with the guest being Mick Foley. One of the reasons as to why Foley was there was because he had an issue with Vince promoting JR's ass on TV. Still don't get that to this day. Foley chants were loud and clear in Sacramento, and the Hardcore legend said that it's cool to be back in the same ring as Carlito. Why? Because it's rare that he stands in the same place as somebody that has worse hair than him. Tried to fact check that and only came up with Rocky Maivia. Foley talked about the unfortunate firing of JR before Linda interrupted. That's a whole other story, but Carlito proceeded to compare JR to Mick Foley, which got some heat from the crowd. Add to that, Caribbean Cool called him the least coolest person he's ever seen. Mick decides to respond saying that he agrees. He isn't cool. He isn't sure if he even wants to be cool. He mentioned Carlito's rule, I spin the face of people who don't want to be cool, before saying he doesn't do or go to cool places. Except for this place, of course, Cheap Pop. Or regardless of how he lives his life, the fans still think Mick Foley, he's cool. As for Carlito, everyone says he's cool, but despite all that, after the fans talk to him, they say, Carlito, he's a horse's ass. Of course, he was ready to spit, but Foley gave him a stern warning, made it seem like such a minuscule thing, spitting produce. You got a match to focus on, buddy. Later that night, Carlito placed the loss on Mick Foley's shoulders, stating that if it wasn't for him, he would have won, and he doesn't care if Foley's retired. He wants him in a match at Taboo Tuesday. Certified douche, I should know. 7 days later, Mick Foley officiated the main event between John Cena and Kurt Angle, but before that could go down, Foley, being the people person, once again made an effort to get JR his job back. Carlito ended up coming out and Stephanie Nakamura at him. Carlito attacked and smashed some apple in his face. But despite all this, despite the fact that he was beaten and battered, he still managed to make it to the end of the night when Carlito once again decided to inflict even more damage ahead of Taboo Tuesday. He almost screwed up and managed to right the ship with a Crossroads. One night before the big event, Carlito gave his final thoughts regarding his match with Mick Foley. One thing to know is the fact that Foley's personas were up to the fans' choice. You could vote for Dude Love, Mankind, Cactus Jack. But anyways, as Carlito's claiming he's going to be Foley, Dude Love pops up on the screen and says that if the fans vote for him, the dude will not have mercy. Cactus Jack appears next, and he didn't have any guarantees. Basically, anything can happen, but the only thing he can guarantee is pain. Mankind is next. He cuts a sad promo, rhyming Carlito's name with a bunch of words. You know, Apollo Credo, Cheeto. He teased using Mr. Socko before telling Carlito to have a nice day. As for the match itself, Mankind won the vote. He came out as a 1996-98 gimmick rather than his most popular iteration, and I just wonder, like, who in the hell voted for Dude Love? Mankind won it clean and even had a special sock this time around for Carlito. Following this, Foley was mostly an ambassador for the WWE, promoting the product, and even wrestled at the Tribute to the Truth show against JBL. He eventually reappeared on TV in February of 2006. So John Cena, the WWE champion, managed to get the choice as to who the special ref will be in his match against Edge for the title, and he chose the hardcore legend himself, Mick Foley. Edge was caught off guard with the announcement, but tried finding a way to tip the balance in his favor. Lito was getting a bit too close with him. Foley was chatting about his books, and Edge had to intervene and straight up warn Foley not to screw him. He gave him some hope, reminding him of Austin at WrestleMania 15 and how he officiated the match, but quickly told the Rated R superstar that he wishes Cena keeps the belt. Despite all this, he'll be impartial. Edge said that if he doesn't, well, Foley's made the biggest mistake of his life. Sounds stupid coming from me. During the match, Foley got knocked down, of course, and this led to some shenanigans. Edge had the match won, but Mick was too dizzy. Challenger got angry, but still went for the cover. And when Cena kicked out, he went up top for a crossbody, but got caught midair, and Cena FU'd him to retain that title. Edge was, of course, fuming, but before anything went down, freaking Lita low blows Foley, and boom, he hits the spear. The Rated R superstar placed the blame on Foley and called him a son of a... So the wheels were in motion. Edge was gonna have a match with the hardcore legend. He was all angry over being a transitional champion, and kayfabe was gonna let loose all his frustrations. The following week, he interrupted a Candice Michelle promo, telling her to hit the bricks so he could speak about Mick Foley. As expected, Edge mentioned how he had Cena be, and the only reason as to why he isn't champ is because of one man. His name is Mick Foley. He said that it was time to give him a personal lesson. He annihilated Hacksaw Jim Duggan because his girl was constantly bombarded with the word ho. And the match itself was a message to one Mick Foley. He cost Edge's dream of walking into WrestleMania as the champion, and so he's going to make it simple. He wanted a match against him. He gave him 1 week to respond to the challenge, and if he doesn't, he'll pay him a visit to Long Island and beat him up in his own damn backyard. 7 days passed by, and the Rated R superstar kicks off the show. He announced that time's up. Edge didn't know if Foley's going to whore himself out at some indie show, write a book nobody cares about, but regardless, this is definitely his best choice in Edge's eyes. He didn't show, and so Lita brought out 2 tickets to Long Island. Edge said that he'll do it because the main event of WrestleMania is gone. Luckily for him, or Foley, he actually showed up. The hardcore legend said that Edge has got it all wrong. He's not to blame for the loss earlier that month. Foley was really sticking it to Edge, calling him a choke, and he didn't want to hear it. All he wanted to hear was an answer, and Foley actually said no. Mick then called himself the greatest transitional champion of all time, and the reason why he said no is because there's nothing left to prove. Mr. Rated R proceeded to call him Rated O for overrated, and in his eyes, Mick will be remembered for 3 things. Number 1, having his ear ripped off. Number 2, being thrown off the Hell in a Cell. Number 3, showing up to Mr. McMahon's room with a sock puppet. Edge felt Foley was pathetic, and if anything, he's got a lot to prove because he's never won at WrestleMania. Of course, Edge mentioned the DQ in that forgettable dumpster match, but Foley lacked that defining moment in match at WrestleMania. On the contrary, he does. He's got a bunch of matches that he could go back and say, oh, I have my WrestleMania moment. And to add to this, he's actually undefeated. And even if the match went down, Mick Foley would still take the L. The hardcore legend did admit that he doesn't have that defining moment, but ended up challenging Edge to another match, a match that lacks rules. His offer was a hardcore match. Edge and Lita were caught off guard with the announcement, and Foley brought out a barbed wire baseball bat. They made a run for it, and Foley hoisted the bat in the air. Following week, Edge gets into it with Foley, who tried to save Maria from an attack, ended up getting chair shot into next week, and to top it all off, Edge concertoed him before accepting the match. So it was personal. Eventually, Edge announced the cutting Edge for Saturday night's main event. Well, yeah, this one. So Edge comes out with his babe and throws shade at his WrestleMania opponent. He didn't think Foley was the hardcore legend. He thought he was a little cuddly teddy bear. Edge was fed up with Foley shilling for whatever city he is in, plugging his work outside of WWE that ends up failing, and he was just a joke in his eyes. It took a bit for Foley to come out. Once he did, he was armed with thumbtacks. Edge, though, stooped to his level, setting the table ablaze. Fire's taken out, and it's on. Foley batters Edge, pours the tacks onto the mat, and screws himself harder than Vince did to Michaels later that night. But he sat up with a smile on his face, and that visual itself is still burnt into my mind 15 years later. Edge gets a swinging neck breaker, and Foley concertos him. So the real Mick Foley finally stood up. He was ready for WrestleMania. Mick affirmed it by his actions 2 nights later on Raw, when he came out looking like Mick Foley circa 1998 with the angry look. Now I was going to skip this, but I'm glad I didn't. He thanked Edge for speaking the truth, Edge was right when he said Foley didn't have that one WrestleMania moment, and if it was any other week, he would have shilled his book, mentioned the city, and danced around with a puppet sock. But the night he had his brains kicked in, he realized Edge is right. When he tasted his own blood on Saturday night's main event, it felt different, and he was thirsty for more. Not only for his own, but Edge's. Edge spoke the truth, but by doing so, he basically awoken something inside of Foley. He created a monster, and he brought back to life the hardcore legend. You think you know me, place, and it's not Edge. It was actually Lita. She tried to keep the crowd silent because Foley was unhinged, and she notified him that Edge is still in Detroit being traded for Saturday. So Lita tried bringing back the old Mick Foley. She claimed Edge wanted the match called off, and instead, he wanted them to have a wrestling match. Put on a classic, and the critics, who called him a glorified stuntman, well, they can prove him wrong. Turns out Lita had Foley figured out wrong because he was in full-on Cactus Jack mode. He's yelling, she slaps him repeatedly when Edge comes in and wusses out. So Lita gets caught in the mandible claw. Edge was left speechless by Foley's actions, and his entire demeanor showed that Mick Foley's got nothing to fear but fear itself. On the final Raw before WrestleMania 22, Mick Foley gave one last promo, and again, it was a home run. He's probably the top 10 best talkers in wrestling history. He just belongs on that list in my eyes. In light of his actions last week, Foley wanted to make good to Lita. Hell, he offered a humble gift to Edge. They come out and Edge promises not to be caught off guard, and if anything, that gift could be a trap. Foley indicated it could be a weapon at WrestleMania for Edge to use, so he responded saying that Foley could use a win, and he also mentioned how his legacy's become a giant ATM account. Basically, Edge didn't want Foley to cement his legacy at his own expense. He was still harboring resentment from the special ref thing 2 months earlier. Mick offered his rebuttal to Edge's statements, saying it's about the defining moments. It's about Edge bleeding from various parts of his body. It's about Edge begging for mercy, but he can't hear him because his ear is ripped off. Foley described in gruesome details of what's to come on Sunday, and as for the present, it was for Edge to have a fighting chance. He opens the box, and would you look at that? Humble my ass. It's about as humble as Shawn Michaels in the 90s. Edge was all tough boyfriend now and was ready for a fight, but Foley pulled out a barbed wire bat to send him running. Well, that's the build. As for their match at WrestleMania, it's a timeless classic. Mick Foley once again brought the goods and then some. He solidified Edge as a star. The guy went to hell and back in order to score that W, and I'll never forget watching this match for the first time as a kid. I watched it a million times, know nearly all the spots, but we'll watch it again in a heartbeat. You just can't overstate what this match did for Edge. You can't. They endured a hell of a lot of pain, and it really impresses me that Foley was still taking bumps and spots like this at his age. I'll of course dive into the entire match much deeper in a future video, WrestleMania 22, but long story short, they tried killing each other. I personally feel that if they had more time, then they could have had the opportunity to surpass the Rumble street fight. Might be a hot take, but that's what I think. And it's just so weird seeing stuff like this being featured on such a huge, elegant stage like WrestleMania. Also, the spot everyone knows. I mean, who the f would agree to something like that? Of course Foley would. It gave him that missing WrestleMania moment and increased Edge's star power tenfold in my eyes. He was basically a new man after this match. And the one thing that stuck to me was the fact that Edge looked absolutely lost afterwards. In an interview with Inside the Ropes, I suggest you watch it, Edge discussed the match in the memorable flaming table spot. And I quote, "If you saw me do something idiotic like that, it was my idea." What the hell? Because if you see me get FU'd off of 2 tables off of a ladder, that was my idea. If it's something that is stupid to my body, it was my idea because that's just the way my mind worked. It was always, like I said, trying to think of the quality of the match. So when I really understood the position I had put myself in was when I was running back at Mick and I went, oh, I don't have a shirt on, and I'm diving face first into this thing. He's going through with his back, and he's got 18 layers of clothes on, and they put this flame retardant gel on us, which was washed off within 2 minutes. We had sweated it off, so I dove through and I went, alright, I'm just gonna tuck my head into Mick's big old belly and hope for the best. But I wrapped my arms around him so it burnt my arms, singed all the hair off my arms, my hands, singed a big chunk of hair off of my head, and I rolled off. That just saw my body smoking. So when I'm crawling over, I'm like, I was trying to make it look like I was in shock, but I was smelling my own burnt flesh, just thinking, well, I think I'm okay, because I can think that I think I'm okay. And just rolling over to Mick and putting my arm on him, and I went, I love you, Mickster, and he goes, I love you too, Esther. Sheesh, the amount of punishment these guys went through. It gives such a surreal feeling to me, they suffered 2nd-degree burns, and I didn't even realize this until years later. Overall, I can't say anything negative about the match. It was fast and furious, it was violent, it was gruesome, it was everything you would want it to be and then some. I can't really say what the expectations were for these two heading into WrestleMania 22, but I'm pretty sure they surpassed those. Hats off to both men for putting on a match that I still think about to this day. Following WrestleMania, Edge slotted into the role he belonged in, and that's the main event, while Foley took a break. On the May 1st, 2006 episode of Raw, the most watched world champion in years came out to host the Cutting Edge. His guest, the hardcore legend Mick Foley. He was upset over the title match from Backlash. He bullied Joey Styles, who eventually had enough, but that's another story. As for Foley, he said that the match hasn't gotten out of his mind. He watched the tape endlessly trying to search for when things went wrong, but in quest and trying to find that, he realized something else. Things were actually right. He had been involved in the greatest match of his career, not only that, but possibly the greatest hardcore match in wrestling history. The only thing that he thought wrong was that he would be face-to-face with the toughest SOB in the WWE. So yep, Mick Foley endorsed Edge by calling him the toughest son of a on the roster. He extended his hand out to both parties, and Foley claimed that his WrestleMania moment was when Edge realized it's all downhill from here. He wouldn't want to endure that kind of pain again, and Foley, on the contrary, wants to. As a matter of fact, he wants it tonight. The fans cheered and he makes the challenge. Look on Edge's face, though, it just says it all. It's like, I went through hell yesterday, right? He whined about that, of course. It made Foley seem like the evil one. Turns out, he actually wanted the match, saying, "You're on, Foley." On crack, that is. But he was willing to do it next week. Hell, Foley gets to choose the match. He thought it was fitting that he's on Cutting Edge now, because next week he'll be cutting edge with barbed wires, razors. He told him to rest up his strep throat, because he'll be needing it for when he streams. Doesn't sound tough when I say it, but Foley's a madman, right? So the WrestleMania 22 rematch was for Raw in Anaheim. Edge and Lita once again sported the WrestleMania 22 attires, and he found the time to insult the California Airheads. That's what he called them. He promised a rated R sequel, and out came Mick Foley with a microphone. He revealed that this match could possibly determine the greatest hardcore champion in history before introducing an additional competitor to the match. Somebody from ECW, Tommy Dreamer. Edge bolted, but he ended up getting some help from Foley, who blasted Tommy Dreamer. Just when they were going to go at it, Mick decided to hand the ball back to Edge, who inflicted damage on Tommy Dreamer. They ripped the skin off his forehead, ruined any possibility of little dreamers, and the crowd was pissed. They did a little combo, and Mick Foley was victorious. So Mick Foley's a heel. It's odd seeing due to the fact that Mick Foley the entire damn time was a good guy. Sure, Mankind or Dude Love may have been bad guys, but Foley himself, like Mick Foley the character, it's very unusual. It was a fresh start for him as well, because for years up to this point, he had been the good guy gatekeeper. He had this little 2-week period in '98 where he was a heel, but it didn't really last long. Anyways, Foley knew that everyone wanted to know why he was with Melina at the See No Evil premiere. That's not, of course, what they wanted. But regarding the actual thing, Foley felt the audience deserved an apology. He said those 2 words, and some of the fans respected that. Since Tommy Dreamer couldn't be here, he said that he was going to apologize to someone else. His mentor, Texas' own Terry Funk. The hardcore icon didn't exactly feel receptive towards Foley. And what in the hell is this guy wearing? It's about as bad as this shirt. Regarding Terry Funk, he wanted to know why Tommy Dreamer was humiliated. Foley's reasoning was because Edge and himself had the greatest hardcore match in history, and that statement alone bothered Funk. Foley didn't want to see the second-rate ECW scumbags come into their house and portray themselves as if they are what hardcore is all about. No, he didn't want that. Foley, he was protective of the WWE from here on. And with these statements, it was clear that Foley and Edge were under the belief that the hardcore match at WrestleMania was the best ever and will always defend the legacy that match left. Funk told him that he's ECW, like you're ECW's own, ECW's family to you. Hell, he even said that Mick was like a son to him. But Foley put that son thing to the test, asking, like, where were you in Madison Square Garden back in 2003? The promo was getting a little real here when Foley revealed that Funk didn't come to MSG because he wanted too much money. It escalated verbally from here on. Foley said that even if Funk died, it'd take a lot of money for him to be brought into a dump like West Texas. That wasn't even it. He said that at his funeral, he'll crawl over Funk's dead body and spit on him. And they were starting to get into it, but Foley, he didn't want to strike. Funk had to do a little thinking in order to get Foley all riled up. He said that if he was Foley, he'd get his head circumcised. He called his wife a whore, calling his kids bastards. But the one thing that pushed Foley over the edge was this statement. WWE sucks. So basically, what you're telling me, the one thing that got Foley angry is the fact that Funk said WWE sucks. I see these all the time on Twitter, you know, somebody's like, oh, WWE sucks. Then they argue over it, whatever. Oh, they defend, they gatekeep or whatever. Or AEW sucks and they fight. It hits a little too close to reality in my eyes. Funk shows he's still got it when Edge comes in and takes a beating. Alita makes things right. The barbed wire was brought in and Funk was in excruciating pain. To top it all off, the WWE Shield brought out the sock and applied the mandible claw. Edge hits the spear and they stand atop of Fallen. Legend. Considering Mick Foley and Edge had the greatest hardcore match in wrestling history, the duo took it a rung further in order to commemorate and honor that match. They decided to bring back the Hardcore Championship. Foley felt that Edge embodies everything that hardcore is all about, and so presented him with the title. It showed how much Foley valued Edge because the title was handed to him as a gift 3 years ago. Edge though wanted to hand it back, which was very babyface of him. One thing to know is that Mick took a slight jab at Flair, stating it's ironic how he earned his WrestleMania paycheck by not getting killed. You know, he took a superplex off a ladder. Just wanted to mention it. Match between the two was teased, but Edge fixed things by whispering something to Lily Garcia. What was it? Well, apparently they're co-champions. Suddenly, the mad scientist returned. I don't know if it's just me, but Paul Heyman as a babyface feels very unnatural. It just doesn't come off as right to me. But anyways, in my eyes, it's one of the more notable promos of his. He says that it's quite fitting that it's legal here, but he sees live prostitution in the middle of the ring. He wasn't even talking about Lita or Edge. It was Mick Foley. He straight up called him a prostitute. Why? Because after sacrificing his career, scratch that, his life, he prostituted his life for Lita and Edge. You see, Paul refused to see Foley prostitute in the name of hardcore. It meant a hell of a lot to him, and all he saw was a shell of Mick Foley. The hardcore champion tried flipping things over its head, questioning Paul like, you've got nothing. You're not the SmackDown GM anymore. You don't run ECW anymore. You're powerless. Heyman agreed, but then made a challenge for this little thing called ECW One Night Stand. He suggested that the co-holders of the hardcore title take on two ECW scumbags in an Extreme Rules match. Mick suggested Paul get the hell out of there, and the memorable part was when Heyman said that Lita's the only one who's got the most nuts in the ring. Edge and Angry Edge accepted, and they were ready to show Paul Lee what hardcore is all about, and this is when the opponents came out. It was Terry Funk and Tommy Dreamer. They beat them from post to steps and sent them running. So the story of this match was simple. Paul Heyman felt that Mick Foley was a sellout, a WWE shill, and he refused to see him desecrate the name of hardcore. Foley, on the other hand, felt he deserved credit for getting out of his comfort zone and becoming the big star he is. He wasn't wandering around in a low-life bingo hall, and in his eyes, walking down the road of ECW leads you to either becoming an addict, a convict, or dead. Reasonable arguments from both sides in my eyes. For the big tag match, Edge faced Tommy Dreamer in an Extreme Rules match. It gave us a little preview of what's to come. Edge, of course, won with the help of Lita, but the damage was done to both sides. Because of this, Mick Foley cut one of his greatest promos. He questioned everyone calling him a whore. He spoke about ECW as if she was an ex-girlfriend, saying that he loved her, but she wanted too much blood, too much of his heart, and too much of his life. Because of this, he left and found fame and fortune in WWE, and Foley admitted that he's a whore, whereas Paul isn't. Mick explained the story of the sock and the doors of opportunity opening. Hell, Foley even had second thoughts about his greatest hardcore match claim, telling Edge they've got to be sicker in the Hammerstein Ballroom. He said that Tommy Dreamer can do everything they can and then some. Terry Funk, his old body will fool you. He can use weapons unlike anyone else. And he was really pushing the fact that he had the guts to sign with WWE unlike Tommy. Foley promised to take the beating of his life in order to exercise the sick, twisted horror that is ECW. He said this line: "You've seen me thrown off cells, slammed into tags, but it's nothing compared to the horrors I unleash on Dreamer and Funk." Wow. I really suggest you guys watch the entire promo. Foley was a troubled soul that couldn't live without the thought of ECW. The little voice cracks were there. He almost shed tears, and no doubt in my mind, it's one of the best damn promos from 2006. I just find it funny that Foley wasn't too fond of it when he wrote the Hardcore Diaries book. But yeah, it's a superb promo. Probably in his top 5. But anyways, the ECW One Night Stand match is a very big highlight to me. It's a big highlight of my childhood. I watched it about 1,000,000 times as a kid in 2006. It was always on rerun along with ECW One Night Stand 2005 and WrestleMania 22. Obviously, I should have been watching it, but whatever. I was a big mark for ECW, even though I didn't live through the original one. You know, I had like 4 DVDs related to it. With that said, Foley generated heat by admitting that he sold out Madison Square Garden, and ECW was run by a visionary. It was owned by a true creative genius, Stephanie McMahon. Long live the Alliance. Oh man, that was hilarious. The match itself turned into a 6-person tag after Beulah and Lita had an altercation, but it was really violent. Fact of the matter is, Terry Funk was 61 years old, yet he was still pulling out this kind of stuff. Full pay-per-view review, I'll eventually dive into this match, but again, it's one of those matches I vividly remember watching from this time period. Barbed wire, flaming barbed wire, there was a helicopter spin straight from SVR, electric crowd atmosphere, and to top it all off, Edge speared Beulah into 2007 before covering her in a manner befitting of the rated R superstar. It really made him enemy number 1 for only a few minutes because someone else took that position, and 06 Edge to me was the best character in wrestling at that time. It took me years to realize this because I spent the entire time hating on him, of course, but yes, Foley and Edge made good on their promise to win it. They went their separate ways, Edge into the title picture, whereas Foley transitioned into a feud that's definitely long overdue on the channel. On the June 12, 2006 episode of Raw, Mick Foley came out to address the events of ECW One Night Stand. He said that the injuries he suffered will heal up in short time, and most importantly, he announced that the old Mick Foley is back. Cheap pop there. Wrong city, though. All of a sudden, Ric Flair, of all people, interrupted, and I should note that he hadn't been on Raw in about 2 months at this point. Now, before I talk about this little segment, I have to relay some well-known historical information involving these two. So, flashback to 1994. Ric Flair was booking WCW. Foley felt that he didn't recognize the full potential in him. This was the quote. Ric Flair was every bit as bad on the booking side of things as he was great on the wrestling side of it. Because of this, Flair decided to hand St. Mick a little receipt while trying to explain things from his perspective. This is what he said in the To Be the Man book back in 2004. When I first started on the booking committee, Foley was working as Cactus Jack and doing an angle where he was living in a homeless shelter. I admit it, I didn't know what to do with a 300-pound guy living in a homeless shelter. It took P.T. Barnum in the form of Vince McMahon to take a guy whose claim to fame was his willingness to get thrown off a cage to turn him into Mankind and make him a champion. Foley has a cult following because of his contribution to hardcore wrestling, but hardcore is such a small part of the history of this business. When I was training, falling off a ladder was not a prerequisite to making it as a professional wrestler. Being fundamentally sound was. Occasionally seeing the insides of a gym was. When I trained under Vern Gagne, we started with 500 free squats, 250 push-ups, 250 sit-ups, and a 2-mile run over farm terrain in 0-degree weather. Then we came back to the barn to be wrestled into submission, cross-face into submission, stretchered into submission, and if Vern didn't like the way things were going, we'd start all over. He would have looked at Mick Foley on day one after Mick failed to do even one thing Vern required and said to Mick, I don't think so. I don't care how many thumbtacks Mick Foley has fallen on, how many ladders he's fallen on, how many continents he's supposedly bled on, he'll always be known as a glorified stuntman. Vern Gagne didn't fall off a ladder. Dory Funk Jr. didn't fall off a ladder. Neither did Wahoo, Steamboat, or Steve Austin. Terry Funk was a great worker before he started doing that. Kurt Angle, Shawn Michaels, and Chris Jericho can do it and maintain their reputation because they're already respected as athletes. And what about people who never did anything else, like the Sandman? He's no wrestler. Hardcore became a niche for a lot of guys who couldn't do all in the ring. I'm not saying that Mick Foley wasn't a star, that he wasn't a great attraction, but in my estimation, Mick Foley was not a great worker. He couldn't punch, he couldn't kick, and in the World Wrestling Federation, he'd spend half the day before television broadcasts sucking up to the writers because he's such a huge fan of himself. There's a difference between being a great performer and being a guy like Brutus Beefcake or the Ultimate Warrior who became famous working for Vince. There's been no demand for him whatsoever, he's just another guy. Mick Foley doesn't understand what it's like to be on that booking committee. Jim Herd humiliated me and made me cut my hair after I'd won the NWA Championship 6 times. How much power did I have? When I was going through all that, how should I have been able to look at Mick Foley, push everything else aside, and mold him into a superstar? Sting, on the other hand, was worthy of becoming the champion. Ho 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 ho! That is a long-ass post. I just had to mention it because, you know, Ric Flair is gonna Ric Flair, and both guys weren't pulling any punches. Funny enough, this was all building to a big match at WrestleMania. Nope. Catering. So the story goes. Flair was hanging out with Arn Anderson when Foley approached him and asked for Flair to sign a book for charity. I should know this was 5 months after the book was released. He doesn't. After that, Flair goes for a handshake. Mick snubs him. May have made fun of him. I read a report. This might be a rumor, but the rest is true. And he gets struck in the face. John Laurinaitis managed to take control of the situation and they begin arguing about all kinds of things. I drew more money than you in the last 10 years. You're not in the same league as myself and the guys I wrestled. They hated each other and Foley said that working a feud with Flair would be like rewarding bad behavior. Bunch speculated this could be a work, but nothing came out of it, and it's unknown exactly when they worked out their differences, but the animosity between both men was stable enough to have a full-on program. Fast forward to present day. Now, literally. Clearly, you can see a huge difference in both men. One wears suits and flaunts, whereas the other wears flannel. Flair said that he doesn't care about what Foley has to say and admitted he wanted to talk to him about wrestling for about 3 years now. He said that he heard Foley making innuendos about what was said in the book and he couldn't wait to say it. Ric Flair had a huge problem with the fact that Mick Foley doesn't wrestle well. Another thing that annoyed him was hearing people say that the best thing they've ever saw was Mick getting thrown off that cell. He thought it was bull that guys like him wrestle to greatness while he falls off a cage. Mick Foley opted to disrespect the past of Flair's, his matches against Harley Race, Steamboat, and Funk, and he said that to the WWE fans, also Foley's fans, Ric Flair will never be in the same league. In Foley's eyes, it drives Flair crazy to see a flannel-wearing, motel-living, glorified stuntman as a huge part of WWE history. He threatened to rip Rick like that, and he took offense in the only way he knows how. Nature Boy wanted to take his shot now, but Foley with a bruised eye preferred sometime else. Flair asked if he should bring in tax tables to get Foley into the ring. Funny enough, Foley didn't want that. Instead, he wanted to out-wrestle the 16-time champ. He wanted a 2 out of 3 falls match, a straight-up wrestling match, and this guy just looks freaking insane. Flair responded to this challenge, stating that after facing Edge in TLC, he woke up in the morning shouting for Mick Foley. I don't know if he did that. He accepted a challenge, and Foley promised to end the legend of Ric Flair in front of his fans. The Hardcore Legend promoted the match as if it was going to be a special technical wrestling fiasco. He was basically showing that he was going to intentionally have a bad match. A couple of minutes later, though, he cost him his match with Edge. Regarding the 2 out of 3 falls match, first of all, Foley read a little excerpt of Ric Flair's novel. Yeah, Foley called it a novel because, in his eyes, this stuff wasn't fact. As expected, he read the part about himself, and then he promised that the glorified stuntman is going to wipe the ring with him with wrestling moves. He suggested that Flair title the book, How I Was Out-Wrestled by Mick Foley. A clear contradiction to the statements of Monday. The match itself was anything but memorable, probably like Raw of 2018. Foley never made good on his promise of utilizing wrestling moves. It was just good old Mick. Flair had a little issue with the knee and he took advantage, and as he's working it, Flair won the first fall like that with an inside cradle. Foley was getting his ass kicked following this, and he gets caught in the figure 4, but a trash can that was brought in seconds ago would come to his aid, giving Flair the victory. So, 2-0. It turned a little extreme from here on, with Foley resorting to barbed wire. Flair was busted open as a result. You expected it. I mean, who in the hell doesn't expect Ric Flair to get busted open? Nobody. Foley's sucks chance intensified, and the Nature Boy was left a pile of heap, much to the chagrin of the audience. Like, the match itself wasn't good, but it advanced the story. That's what I'm trying to say. In Flair's eyes, this validates his claim of Foley being nothing more than a glorified stuntman. Nothing Foley does resembles wrestling in his eyes, and the stitches were nothing to Flair. He promised that the next time he sees him, he'll be his all night and all day long. That's what she said. Fast forward 2 weeks later, and Ric Flair made his return all healed up. It would be for nothing, but I'll get into that soon. He was promising to tell the truth about Foley. I'm under the assumption he's probably going to reveal that Foley's frugal. But anyways, he spoke about vengeance now. Foley made a wrestling match challenge, and in his eyes, he proved that Foley's a glorified stuntman. And as he's speaking about the match, Foley via satellite offered his rebuttal. He exposed Flair having a ghostwriter despite the fact he's considered an author. And of course, he had to mention his own book was a New York bestseller. He showed fury and anger at the fact that he lost the ear in Munich, all that, and he takes the easy way out. Like Ric Flair thinking, oh, I take it easy? Seriously, you should check out this promo. But anyways, Foley said that he learned from the bottom up. He slept in his car, ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches on a daily basis, and Flair's got the nerve to say he's wrestled a bunch of badasses and he's not on the list. Mick wanted to know how much worse these imaginary badasses could have made Flair bleed. And when he saw that his family cry their eyes out, the sight of blood coming from their father, Foley's head was clear. After all those years of Rick living in his head rent-free, he was gone. Now Ric Flair's irrelevant in his eyes, and there ain't no rematch. The Nature Boy heard enough and took the blazer off, and he didn't want to hear about the past and wanted to get hardcore. Seeing as Flair wanted to get violent, Big Show and Paul Heyman said, say no more, and a match between the two was made for ECW the next night. It was a very violent match that I'd say deserves to be talked about more. Ric Flair's 57, 58, he was still doing stuff like this. It showed that Ric Flair still got it, but seeing him in ECW is so damn odd. As for Foley, he intended to leave Flair for Dead at Vengeance, hence the ball bat under the ring, and regarding a possible rematch, he declined. So basically, Ric Flair is never gonna get it. Later that night, Foley once again appeared via satellite, and he spoke about Ric Flair's match on ECW and called him hardcore. Despite showing that he has balls, it still doesn't change his stance regarding a rematch, but if he wants to be like Mick Foley, he should wear flannel, drive a broken down car, and then proceeded to sing a random Michael Jackson song telling him he's out of his life. Immediately afterwards, the Nature Boy made his response. He of course acknowledged the beatdown he took on Tuesday, but regarding Mick Foley, he still wanted him in a hardcore match. Unfortunately for himself, Nitro and Melina interrupted. The reason why they were here was to tell Flair that he's out of Mick Foley's life. I don't know why Mick Foley's buddy with them, but he is. Nitro proceeded to make an attack on the 16-time champ, but he managed to recover though and send them running. The reason why I mention this is because for some random reason, Melina was a part of this story. She got hurt in the heat of the action, and Flair told her to tell Mick. The Nature Boy says, woo. Little accident, Melina suffered damage to catch the eye of Mick Foley, and he thought it was foolish that Flair called him fat boy and it hurt him 30 years ago when his brother called him that. He thought it was sad. Ric Flair turned into this feeble man that digs into a bag of cliches because he's got nothing. Ironically, he called him a second-rate circus show for wrestling on ECW and falling on thumbtacks in order to lure him, Mick Foley obviously, back to the ring. As to the fact that he attacked a defenseless woman that was a friend of his, he was going to come face-to-face and air their differences with Ric Flair next week. He suggested Rick keep his cliches at home and bring his heart and mind, otherwise he will embarrass him. So now that Mick Foley and Ric Flair were set to confront each other, Mick needed somebody to introduce him. So he's out there hyping up the confrontation, sharing similarities with Flair. They try helping young talent. they have famous friends, appeared on the news. And sure, Flair may have gotten arrested for road rage, but Foley was trying to show the similarities between themselves. Ric Flair heard enough, and he knew damn well that he's overstayed his welcome in the WWE, but he questioned whether or not this was the hardcore Mick Foley. He fainted, and it wasn't about books to Flair. It was about wrestling, and compared Mick Foley to A-Rod, who was getting lazy around this time. As for the imaginary badasses, Flair mentioned Bruiser Brody, Stan Hansen, Harley Race, Terry Funk. He said that those guys would walk over Foley in order to get to the bathroom. And since Mick tasted his own blood, he wanted to do the same. He wanted Cactus Jack, Mick Foley, whatever the hell he wanted to be called. Hell, he can shove that Socko up his ass. It didn't matter. The fans certainly wanted to see the match, and so basically, Mick Foley got Ric Flair to the point where he wanted to be like him. He wanted to jump off cages. He used barbed wire baseball bat. All of this just to have the match, and all the talk about family coming from Foley is just a joke in Flair's eyes. He said that Melina would be hanging out with him, not Foley, and this is when he heard enough and said that he doesn't see Melina like that. He sees a friend, and best of all, Mick didn't want to take advice from an absentee father twice. He did apologize for that statement before talking about this random flight they had. So apparently, by the freak of luck, they sat next to each other. No political talk, no wrestling talk, but they certainly talked about family. It touched Mick when he saw Rick call each of his children and tell them that he loves them. Mick said that he'll never have the bonding experience with his kids like Flair, because he'll never know what it's like to look his kids in the eye and tell them, kids, your father has been arrested, and oh my god, Ric Flair had enough. Jonathan Coachman comes out and he reveals a match between the two was made for SummerSlam. Mick, though, offered his rebuttal, telling Vince to read the contract. He gets to choose who he'll wrestle, and regarding Flair, he'll be damned to wrestle a broken piece of crap like him. It was one hell of a promo. First time watching it, and I'm impressed. I may have watched it 3 or 4 years ago, I don't remember, because I watched a bunch of episodes of Raw of 2006, but I was impressed, you know? Ric Flair occasionally had some memorable promos during this run, and in my eyes, this was one of them. Nobody's better than him when he's kayfabe angry. Like this and the Triple H feud, I really loved them. They had another weird-ass promo in TNA about 4 years later, but that's a story for another day. Like I said, Ric Flair stooped to Foley's level in my eyes, and it was no longer about calling Mick a glorified stuntman. It was personal. So now, how was Ric Flair going to get the match he wanted? Shouting like Batista wasn't going to work. He instead brought in the 2001 Foley is Good book. He said that he didn't want to be like Foley, he didn't want to look like him, resemble any sort of him. For a week now, he's trying to find what ticks him off. So we read the Foley is Good book and decided to drop it to the man, elbow it. 2 million copies sold, and Ric Flair just didn't give a damn. Except for one page. The page where Mick Foley revealed that he idolized Ric Flair. The greatest match in his eyes was a Flair Funk I Quit match from '89. Flair tried to come to the conclusion stating that the reason why Mick declined the match was because 1, he's scared of losing to him, or 2, he knows he can't beat him. All of a sudden, Mick comes out and admits that the I Quit match is his dirty little secret, and he idolized Ric Flair. Then he talked about how the match would bring the best out of both of them, but he didn't want Rick at the top of the mountain. If the match goes down, that's exactly what would happen. He's basically helping Rick reach his goal. He reminded the Nature Boy of WCW and found it ironic that he stands in the way of Rick's dreams. Basically, Mick Foley didn't really want to hear much from Flair unless it's something more than just a match. Otherwise, Memphis, Rick, and Vince are all invited to kiss his ass. His arch nemesis still tried to convincing him to accept the match by making the hardcore legend seem like a coward. He was begging him to accept the match. Hell, he even called his match the greatest hardcore match in history, and that pushed the button. Mick didn't want to break the 12-year vow. He promised not to help Ric Flair, but because he was so embarrassed by him on Raw, because he disrespected his friend, because he made him realize that the guy he looked up to was nothing more than a piece of crap, Mick Foley challenged Ric Flair to a match at SummerSlam. Mick Foley was ready to show Ric Flair that he's the toughest guy to wear a pair of sweats. Also, it was going to be I Quit. Before leaving, Mick told him that in a career filled with great matches, this match may be his greatest of them all, but it also might be his last. Flair said, "May one of us bleed to death in Boston." Spoiler alert, some of those things came true. Foley broke his promise, and Flair was going to go into a type of match Mick Foley excels in. Now, Ric Flair did have experience in this match, of course, but Mick Foley, he's a totally different guy when he's in hardcore situations. It's his match specialty, you know, I Quit, hardcore, those kinds of matches are his type. This is the same guy that told The Rock during the I Quit match, "You'd have to kill me." Both men had reasonable claims. You know, Flair was calling Mick a coward. Mick was right in a bunch of claims he made towards Rick also. But anyways, heading into the match, Foley revealed that he has only bled 4 times in his entire WWE run, and this Sunday, it ain't gonna be him. He whooped Flair's ass again later that night, but in a shocker, Ric Flair never bled. You'd think that was the end of the build, but the next night in ECW was actually their final encounter. First of all, it's bizarre seeing Mick Foley dancing with a couple of divas to the tune of Buttons by Snoop Dogg and the Pussycat Dolls. That's literally the last thing I expected today. He was figuratively loosening up his buttons, but then Ric Flair crashed the party and attacked. He repeatedly low-blowed Mick and ironically busted him open from his mouth. He was completely incensed, and for a babyface, Rick told the fan to kiss his ass. It was hilarious due to the sheer fact it was a kid.
Kiss my ass, kid.
As for the match at SummerSlam, Mick Foley expected a whole different Ric Flair, but after the attack on Tuesday, he was doubting himself. Then to top it all off, Melina's like, if you go out there and lose, it doesn't look good for my reputation. After hearing this, Mick turned it up to 11 and promised to make the worthless piece of crap say the words, I-Q-U-I-T. But anyways, it was really gruesome. To think this all stemmed from a damn book is insane. And they had such a fun and entertaining program. Whatever you think of their matches, the promos were top notch. This match in particular was good. The crowd was into it, barbed wire in abundance, thumbtacks were brought in, Ric Flair bled, which once again is about as likely as somebody asking Bret Hart about Montreal. Mick Foley managed to bring out the absolute worst in Ric Flair. He had zero regard for his opponent utilizing the barbed wire bat. Foley took a bad bump, and because of this, a bunch of officials came out. Melina checked up on him, and the ref was ready to ring the bell, but Flair reminded him that this isn't a lay-your-ass match, it's an I quit match. He continued raking the barbed wire in Foley's face, to the point where Melina threw in the towel, much to the chagrin of the fans. He didn't want to hear it and continue where he left off, even rolled over the tacks just to get to Mick, and as he's gonna blast Melina, he quits. And that was it. It wasn't the best match on the show, but it certainly was the most memorable. Hell, it might be the best match to you, right? I mean, I haven't watched that full show in years, so maybe it is. The match itself to this day sticks in my mind as one of the most violent to come from the 2000s. Ric Flair was so detached from his old self, he was becoming this whole new monster, and he was so close to going after Melina, but Foley quit. One thing I like about this match is the fact that Mick Foley, despite being a heel, was still the same as he was 10 years ago. What I mean by that is that he lives and dies by hardcore wrestling. His entire character is based on a man that takes a hell of a lot of punishment but doesn't quit. It wasn't like, oh, he turned heel, guess he's gotta quit. No, that's the thing I liked about it. It was good, but not for the weak of heart. Now that the Foley-Flair feud was over, at least in WWE because they continued feuding in TNA and I'll eventually dive into it, the next night on Raw, Mick Foley had a sudden detour in his little heel turn. So first of all, Mr. McMahon was angry about DX. He bumped into Mick, and after being called Vince, he threatened to fire somebody tonight if he doesn't join his Kiss My Ass Club. Melina thanked him for SummerSlam and said that she's always going to be in debt to him. At the end of the night, he comes down to the ring with her. Mick says that while he loves his job, he doesn't need it, and if Boss Man doesn't know, well, he saved up a fortune. McMahon reminded him of the fact that he said somebody's getting fired, and he said that it's Melina. Mick said nobody's worth kissing ass for except her. He told Vince to pull his pants down. Mick quickly did it, but then all of a sudden, Melina low-blowed him. Then Vince revealed that they've got 2 words for Mick: you're fired. Welcome to heartbreak. Somehow McMahon had an even worse night than him despite all of this. So all this time that Mick was white knighting for Melina was for nothing? But yeah, he was kayfabe fired. This was all leading to a big match between Mr. McMahon and Mick Foley at WrestleMania 23, but it slowly turned into a little thing with Donald Trump, and other plans for Foley included a possible match with Umaga, but a wrench was thrown into the plans and he was left off a WrestleMania 23 card. And so this is Mick Foley's return run. Original plans were for Terry Funk to face McMahon after biting his assy up. I don't know why that was supposed to happen, but it was. Now, my personal opinion on the run is, well, the Edge feud was awesome. Well, Foley's just too likable, in my opinion. Like, he can't really play a good heel. He tried his best here, but is much more suited as a babyface. He put over Edge massively like nobody else. And as for the Ric Flair feud, they honestly should have kept Melina away, because if it wasn't for that, we would have seen a much better matchup at SummerSlam. Like, that match was good as hell, but that ending with Melina coming in and stopping him is just something that I think should have happened. He was talking about Melina a little too much in the book and on his blog at the time they decided to bring her in. I just think it was unnecessary. But yeah, he had a bunch of good matches during this run, and it was fresh, you know, to see Foley as a heel once more, but he is much more suited as a baby face. What do you guys think of Mick Foley's run in 2006? Please comment down below. And that's your first video. Make sure you hit a double arm DDT on the like button, press the mandible claw on the subscribe button. Peace, I'm out.